The late afternoon sun burned gold over the jagged cliffs of the canyon, casting long shadows that twisted and stretched across the rocky terrain. Ethan Cole rode slowly along the narrow trail, his horse's hooves crunching against the loose gravel. He had been traveling alone for days, guiding his mount through the unforgiving desert landscape, the wind tugging at his coat and whispering through the canyon walls. The silence of the place was almost sacred, broken only by the occasional cry of a distant hawk or the echo of rocks tumbling down the cliffs. Then came the sound that made him freeze, a high, piercing cry that did not belong to any animal he knew. Ethan's hand instinctively went to the reins as he scanned the cliffs with sharp, practiced eyes. The sound came again, this time sharper, more desperate, echoing off the rocks like a call for life itself. Without hesitation, he spurred his horse forward, following the sound. Around a bend, the canyon opened into a narrow gorge, and there she was, Ayanna, a young woman barely clinging to a narrow ledge above the jagged rocks below. Her dark hair was tangled, her clothes torn, and her eyes wide with fear. One wrong move and the fall would be fatal. Ethan's heart quickened, but his hands were steady. He knew he had little time. He guided his horse to the edge of the ledge, careful not to startle the frightened animal, and called out in a calm, firm voice, "Hold on. I've got you." Ayanna looked down at him, her gaze a mixture of fear, distrust, and something else. Recognition, perhaps, of the danger she could no longer face alone. She hesitated, her body trembling as loose stones slid beneath her feet. The wind tugged at her, as if the canyon itself were trying to pull her down. Ethan assessed the situation quickly. He would have to act fast. Dropping to one knee, he extended a hand toward her. "Grab it!" he shouted over the roar of the wind. Her fingers brushed his for a heartbeat, then slipped. The moment stretched unbearably, the world narrowing to two people suspended between life and death. Ethan's jaw clenched, his mind racing. He repositioned himself, bracing against a sturdy rock. "Now, Ayanna, you can do it." With a surge of strength born of desperation, she reached again, and this time his grip held. Ethan's arms strained as he hauled her upward, each inch a battle against gravity and panic. Finally, with a grunt, he pulled her over the edge, and they both collapsed onto solid ground. For a long moment, neither spoke. She lay on the rocky floor, chest heaving, hair plastered to her face with sweat and dust. Ethan leaned back, wiping a smear of grime from his brow. "You're safe," he said simply, though the words felt inadequate. Ayanna's eyes met his, wary yet filled with an unspoken acknowledgement. She was trembling, but it wasn't entirely from fear. There was a spark in her gaze, pride, defiance, and a hint of something wild that could not be tamed. She pulled herself to a sitting position and studied him silently, as if measuring whether he was a friend or just another stranger in a harsh land. Thank you," she said finally, her voice low, cautious. Her accent was soft but carried the musical lilt of her Apache heritage. Ethan nodded, giving her a small, reassuring smile. "You had me worried for a moment. That was a long way down." Ayanna looked away, her eyes tracing the jagged cliffs, then back to him. "I know how to survive," she said quietly. "I didn't expect anyone to come." He studied her closely. There was strength in her posture, even in exhaustion, and a fierce intelligence in her eyes. "You survived," he said simply, "but not alone this time." The wind whistled through the canyon as if carrying their unspoken understanding. In that moment, neither could have known how the events of that single afternoon would change both their lives. One had been saved, the other had acted without hesitation. But both were caught in a thread that would lead them far beyond the canyon, into a world of danger, discovery, and a destiny that neither could yet see. As the sun dipped lower, casting long orange shadows across the rocks, Ethan offered a hand to help her stand. Ayanna hesitated for just a moment, then took it. The first step of a journey neither of them had planned had begun, and the canyon, silent once more, seemed to hold its breath. After the harrowing rescue, Ethan guided Ayanna down from the canyon and across the rocky terrain toward a small clearing where his horse grazed. The air was heavy with dust and the scent of dry sagebrush. Ayanna moved with a cautious grace, her steps hesitant but deliberate. She had survived the canyon's treacherous cliffs, but her mind and spirit bore wounds that were less visible than the scratches and bruises on her arms and legs. Ethan set about making a temporary camp. He untied a bundle of supplies from his saddle, spreading out a blanket and gathering a few scraps of food. His movements were methodical, practical, but he kept glancing at her, aware of the tension in her posture. She seemed both grateful and wary, like a wild animal that had been spared from a trap but still had reason to distrust the world. "You need to rest," Ethan said gently. "You've been through a lot." Ayanna shook her head. "I'm fine," she murmured, though the tremor in her hands betrayed her words. She crouched near a small fire Ethan had managed to spark, her gaze fixed on the flames, her mind clearly elsewhere. Ethan studied her quietly, sensing that the surface calm hid a storm of emotions. "I don't mean just the canyon," he said, his voice low. "I mean everything. You've been running from something or someone for a long time, haven't you?" Her eyes flickered toward him, sharp and wary. For a moment she considered answering, but then she looked back into the fire, jaw tight. "I don't know if anyone should know that," she said softly, almost to herself. Ethan nodded slowly. He understood. Some stories were not shared lightly, especially those carved into a person's very soul. "Fair enough," he said. "But you don't have to face it alone." Ayanna's lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to reject him, to retreat into the walls she had built around herself. But something about his calm, unshakable presence made her pause. It was rare to meet someone who didn't recoil from the fire she carried inside her, someone who didn't treat her like she was fragile or broken. The night fell, and the desert air grew colder, sharp against their skin. Ethan offered her a canteen of water and a small portion of dried meat. She accepted it reluctantly, taking small, precise bites. Between them, silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. It was the quiet of two people learning the contours of each other's presence. "Why are you out here alone?" Ethan asked after a while, keeping his tone neutral, careful not to pry too deeply. Ayanna's gaze lifted to the sky, where the first stars of evening began to shimmer. She traced the constellations with her eyes before answering. "I didn't have a choice," she said softly. "I was forced to leave my people, my home." Her voice broke slightly, and she quickly turned away, ashamed of the tremor of emotion she had revealed. Ethan watched her silently, understanding without needing more words. Her Apache heritage was not just a lineage. It was a life lived with knowledge of the land, of survival and of pain. Every movement, every gesture she made hinted at lessons learned in a world that demanded strength, courage, and cunning. "You're stronger than most," he said quietly, "not just in body, but here." He tapped the side of his chest over his heart. "You survived the canyon. You'll survive everything else too." Ayanna's eyes met his again, softer this time, a flicker of gratitude, or perhaps relief, passing through them. She still had her walls, still had the past to reckon with, but for the first time in a long while, she felt the faint stirrings of trust. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, Ethan and Ayanna sat together, separated by space but connected by an unspoken bond. One had saved the other physically. Now, quietly, a tentative bridge began to form between them in the realm of the heart. Outside the firelight, the canyon lay silent, indifferent to their struggles, yet somehow protective, as if it recognized that this meeting, this fragile moment, was the start of something neither could have foreseen. Ayanna's path was far from certain, and her past still cast a long shadow. But for the first time since her flight, she allowed herself to believe that survival could include companionship, understanding, and perhaps even something like hope. And Ethan, watching the stars reflected in her dark eyes, realized that he had rescued more than a body from the canyon that day. He had found a spark, a soul that demanded respect, courage, and care. Ayanna was fierce, untamed, and unknowingly powerful, and somehow he knew that her destiny would not only survive this world, it would change it. By the time the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon, Ethan had led Ayanna to the outskirts of a small frontier town nestled at the edge of the canyon. Dusty streets stretched between low wooden buildings, their facades bleached by the relentless sun. The town was waking slowly. Horses whinnied in stables, shopkeepers swept their steps, and the occasional traveler hurried along the main street. Ethan guided Ayanna cautiously, keeping her close. Every step seemed to amplify her unease. She had survived cliffs and wild horses, but the watchful eyes of strangers, people whose language and customs she did not fully trust, made her wary. Her dark eyes scanned the town, alert to every movement, every whisper. The townsfolk, in turn, noticed her striking presence, a young woman with an otherworldly grace. Her movements precise and deliberate, her features marked by a fierce intelligence that both intrigued and unsettled them. As they entered the main street, a few townspeople paused to stare. Whispers traveled quickly. "Who's that?" one woman murmured. "A stranger." A man at the general store squinted, tipping his hat, but his expression was wary. There was something different about her, something not entirely like them. Ethan sensed the tension and tightened his hold on Ayana's arm.
"Stay close," he murmured.
"We're just passing through." Ayana nodded, her jaw tight, but her eyes didn't leave the curious onlookers. She had encountered suspicion before. Humans and their prejudice were rarely kind, but it stung nonetheless. She was a stranger here, and her Apache blood made her an outsider, and yet there was something raw and almost defiant in the way she held herself, even in discomfort. Ethan led her to a small boarding house at the edge of town. The wooden sign creaked in the morning wind. The Dusty Trail Inn. Inside, it smelled of aged wood, smoke, and the faint tang of horses. The innkeeper, a stout woman with kind eyes and a wary demeanor, looked up as they entered. "Morning," Ethan said. "We'll need a room for a while." The woman hesitated, glancing at Ayana. "You're traveling with her?" she asked, a hint of suspicion in her tone. "Yes," Ethan replied firmly. "She's safe now. We just need a place to rest." Ayana's eyes flickered briefly to Ethan, silently acknowledging the protection he offered without demanding gratitude. She had long learned to rely on herself, and trusting another, especially a stranger, was not easy. Yet there was a sense of relief that she could let down her guard, even if only slightly, in his presence. They were shown to a modest room. Dust motes floated in shafts of sunlight, and the faint smell of pine from the surrounding forest drifted in through the open window. Ethan helped Ayana settle onto the bed, brushing the dust from her clothes and tending to the minor scratches from the canyon. His hands were careful and deliberate, never lingering more than necessary, but the attention carried a quiet intimacy that did not go unnoticed. "I've been on my own for a long time," Ayana said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't often let people in." Ethan nodded, understanding more than she realized. "Sometimes we need someone anyway," he said. "Even if it's just for a little while." She looked away, her mind racing. The town was full of unknowns, some curious, some hostile. She had faced danger in the wilderness, but people's suspicion was a different kind of threat, one that required diplomacy, patience, and careful observation. Still, she could sense that with Ethan she had a temporary ally, a shield against the immediate hostility of strangers. Outside, the town's pace began to quicken. Merchants opened their shutters, children darted through the streets, and whispers of the newcomer spread like wildfire. Some were fascinated, others wary, but all eyes seemed to linger on her. Ayana felt their gazes like a tangible weight, reminding her of the sharp divide between her world and theirs. Ethan, sensing her tension, offered a reassuring smile. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "We'll figure it out, one step at a time." She allowed herself a small, reluctant nod. For the first time since being rescued, she felt the possibility of belonging, even if fleeting, within reach. And though she remained cautious, she could not deny a flicker of curiosity about this strange town and the people in it. Perhaps this place, with its wary townsfolk and dusty streets, could be the first step toward a future she had never dared to imagine. As the morning sun climbed higher, casting golden light over the town, Ayana and Ethan prepared to face the challenges that awaited them. The canyon was behind them, but new trials, hostility, suspicion, and the uncharted territory of human connection lay ahead. And through it all, the bond forged in the canyon shadows would guide them, fragile but unbroken, into the unknown. The town seemed peaceful enough during the day, but for Ayana, every quiet moment was a reminder of what she had lost and what still hunted her. After the initial curiosity of the townsfolk, a subtle tension had begun to build, a feeling that she could not ignore. Ethan, perceptive as ever, noticed her restless glances and tightened grip on the reins as they rode through the outskirts. That evening, by the fire in the small yard behind the inn, Ayana finally allowed herself to speak, though her voice was low and guarded. "I didn't leave my people by choice," she admitted, staring into the flames. Her eyes reflected the dancing firelight, but there was something deeper in them, a shadow that had followed her from the canyon. Ethan remained silent, letting her words settle into the quiet night. He had learned by now that some stories could not be rushed, that trust was earned in fragments and moments. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm here if you do." Ayanna inhaled sharply, memories rising unbidden. She had been a child of the Apache lands, taught to read the wind, the sky, and the movement of animals. Her people had been her world, tight-knit, proud, and fiercely protective. Yet even in that sanctuary, danger had always been close. Raids, rival clans, and settlers had encroached on their territory. She remembered the screams, the smoke curling into the sky, the moment when everything familiar had been torn from her. "I was there when the soldiers came," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. "They destroyed the village. And my family. I barely escaped." Her hands clenched into fists, fingernails digging into her palms. The pain was still raw, but she had carried it silently for years. Sharing it was terrifying, but necessary in some strange, unspoken way. Ethan listened intently, his expression softening. "You survived," he said, breaking the silence. "You've been running from them, but also from what you lost." "That's a heavy burden." Ayanna's eyes flickered toward him. "It's more than running," she said quietly. "It's knowing that I carry their blood and their enemies wherever I go. I am hunted, sometimes in ways I can't even see." Ethan felt a chill in the night air, but he did not flinch. Instead, he leaned closer, the firelight casting shadows across his weathered face. "Then let me help you face it," he said. "I can't fight your battles for you, but I can make sure you don't face them alone." For a long moment, Ayanna said nothing. Her heart had been guarded for so long that the notion of relying on someone else felt foreign and dangerous. Yet as she studied Ethan, she saw no condescension in his eyes, only a quiet respect for her strength, her intelligence, and her survival. "I don't want to put you in danger," she finally said. "If they find me, if they know I'm here." She left the sentence unfinished, but the threat was clear. Her past was not gone. It lingered in shadows and whispers in those who would seek to control or exploit her. Ethan shook his head. "If anyone's coming for you," he said, his voice firm, "they'll have to get through me first." There was no bravado in his words, only a calm certainty that surprised even him. The night grew deeper, and Ayanna began to relax slightly, her body still tense but her mind slowly allowing the possibility of safety. She spoke of her childhood, of the lessons she had learned in the desert and the forest, the ways to track, hunt, and survive. She spoke of courage, honor, and the unyielding bond of her people. Ethan listened, absorbing every word, realizing that her Apache blood was not just a danger or a legacy. It was a source of wisdom and power that set her apart from anyone he had ever met. In the shadows of the inn-yard, the past and present intertwined. Ayanna's history was a weight, yes, but it was also a key to her survival. And Ethan, by her side, understood that her strength, born of loss, endurance, and heritage, was something to respect, not tame. As the fire burned low, the distant howl of a coyote echoed across the desert. The sound carried a warning, but also a reminder. The world was not safe, and Ayanna's enemies were still out there. Yet for the first time in years, she felt a fragile sense of hope. Perhaps she could face her past, navigate the dangers of the present, and even shape her own destiny. Ethan watched her silently, the weight of her story pressing against the night air. He realized that rescuing her from the canyon was only the beginning. Her past would continue to shadow them, but it also revealed the extraordinary depth of the woman before him. And he knew that whatever lay ahead, danger, prejudice, or betrayal, they would face it together, drawing strength from trust, respect, and the bond forged in the fires of survival. The next morning, the desert awoke in muted shades of gold and rust, the wind carrying a dry, earthy scent that spoke of survival and resilience. Ethan and Ayanna left the town behind, venturing into the rugged terrain that stretched beyond the canyon. The sun rose steadily, casting long shadows across the rocks and sand, and the only sounds were the rhythmic crunch of hooves and the occasional call of a hawk circling overhead. Ayanna moved with a quiet confidence, her bare feet, though hidden now in worn boots, tapping lightly on the ground, sensing every shift in the earth beneath them. She led Ethan to a plateau overlooking a shallow ravine, where the land fell away sharply, revealing patterns in the soil and traces of wildlife that would have been invisible to any ordinary traveler. "Stop," she said, holding up her hand. Her dark eyes scanned the ground carefully. "Do you see those tracks?" Ethan leaned over, studying the impressions in the dirt. "Deer?" he guessed. She shook her head. "Coyote. But notice how they change direction here. They're moving toward water. And look here, see the marks?" She pointed to a series of broken twigs. "Someone passed this way recently. Maybe human, maybe dangerous." Ethan nodded slowly, impressed. "You can tell all that from footprints." Ayanna smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and melancholy. "It's the land speaking. You have to listen. Every mark, every shadow, every rustle tells a story." For hours, she taught him to read the desert like a book, showing him how to follow tracks, identify edible plants, and find water where none seemed to exist. She demonstrated the subtle ways to move quietly, how to merge with the wind, and how to use the sun and stars to navigate. Ethan was a quick learner, but he realized that Ayanna's lessons were more than survival skills. They were lessons in patience, observation, and humility. As they paused to rest, she handed him a small knife, worn but meticulously maintained. "This is for protection," she said, "but also for understanding. Everything you take from the land you must respect." Ethan looked at the blade, then back at her. "You've lived like this your whole life?" "Since I could walk," she replied, her eyes distant for a moment. "The land teaches you more than people ever will. And it doesn't forgive mistakes." There was a quiet intensity in her tone that made him realize just how different her world had been. She had survived hardships that he could scarcely imagine, relying not on luck or chance, but on skill, intuition, and an intimate knowledge of the environment. And yet, beneath her strength, there was a softness that only revealed itself in moments like this. Teaching, guiding, sharing. Ethan attempted a tracking exercise, following a set of tracks she had identified. His first few attempts were clumsy. He misread the signs, lost the trail, and struggled to keep pace. Each time Ayanna corrected him patiently, demonstrating, explaining, and insisting he observe rather than act. "Don't force it," she said. "You have to let the land speak, not impose your will on it." By afternoon, Ethan had improved noticeably, but Ayanna remained alert, her eyes scanning for threats beyond their immediate focus. "Out here, danger isn't always obvious," she said. "Not every predator is a wolf or a bear. Some are human, and some are worse." Her words carried a weight he hadn't anticipated, a reminder that the skills she taught were not just for learning, they were for survival against both nature and man. He looked at her with renewed respect. She was fierce, untamed, and undeniably powerful in ways he had only begun to understand. As the sun began its descent, painting the canyon walls in fiery reds and oranges, Ayanna led Ethan back to a shaded alcove where they could rest for the night. She shared stories of her childhood in the Apache lands, the rituals, the dances, and the lessons from elders who had taught her to honor the land and her people. Each story deepened Ethan's admiration, revealing layers of resilience, intelligence, and a heritage that shaped her every action. Sitting by the fire that night, Ethan realized something he hadn't expected. This woman, whom he had rescued from a cliff, was now guiding him. She was teaching him not just survival, but perspective, how to see the world differently with awareness, respect, and humility. And in that process, he felt their bond grow stronger, a thread weaving between them that promised partnership, trust, and perhaps something more profound. Outside the alcove, the desert wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. In that moment, under the vast sky, Ethan understood that rescuing Ayanna had been only the beginning. Her lessons would shape not just his skills, but his understanding of courage, loyalty, and the quiet power that came from embracing both the land and the person who commanded it. The tranquility of the desert morning was shattered by the distant clatter of hooves and the harsh sound of shouting. Ethan and Ayanna, already awake and tending the small fire by the canyon's edge, exchanged a sharp glance. Both had learned to read the signs of danger, the sudden flutter of dust in the wind, the echo of voices carried too clearly across the rocks. "They're coming," Ayanna said softly, her hand instinctively brushing the knife at her belt. Her dark eyes scanned the horizon, sharp and alert, as she crouched low behind a rock formation. Ethan followed her gaze, spotting a small group of men riding fast, their intentions unmistakable. Some wore the rough leathers of hunters, others carried weapons that gleamed in the sun. "Looks like trouble," he muttered, tightening his grip on his revolver. "We need a plan, fast." Ayana nodded, her mind already calculating. She had survived far worse than these strangers, but she understood the danger of underestimating humans. They were unpredictable, cunning, and often cruel. She whispered instructions to Ethan, outlining a route that used the canyon's natural features for cover, guiding him silently as they moved toward a narrow ravine where they could observe without being seen. As the riders approached, Ayana studied them carefully. "Bounty hunters," she said finally. "They know something about me. Or think they do. And they won't leave without what they came for." Ethan's jaw tightened. Then they picked the wrong day to come looking. He glanced at her, realizing for the first time how capable she was, not a damsel in distress, but a partner in strategy, fierce and precise. The riders dismounted, spreading out in search of tracks. Ayana pointed out subtle signs in the sand, broken twigs, footprints, and disturbed rocks that revealed their direction. "They're close," she whispered, "but slow. Overconfidence is their weakness." Ethan nodded, following her lead as they set up a defensive position. Ayana instructed him to stay behind a ledge, while she moved closer to create a distraction. She crouched low, her movements fluid and silent, disappearing into the rocky shadows. Ethan watched, impressed, as she used the terrain to her advantage, guiding the attackers unknowingly toward him without them realizing it. Then came the first warning shot, a rifle discharged from the ridge above, narrowly missing a rock near Ethan's shoulder. Dust and small stones sprayed around him, but he remained steady, returning fire with careful aim. The bounty hunters realized too late that they had walked into a trap. Using Ayana's knowledge of the land, Ethan was able to anticipate their movements, creating barriers and forcing them into vulnerable positions. Ayana reappeared suddenly, emerging from behind a boulder with her knife drawn. Her movements were precise, almost ceremonial in their efficiency. One of the men lunged at her, but she sidestepped effortlessly, using his momentum against him and sending him sprawling to the ground. Ethan covered her, his revolver barking sharply into the canyon air. The other riders faltered, realizing they had underestimated both the woman and the man they sought to intimidate. The confrontation was brief but decisive. The bounty hunters, injured and shaken, realized they were outmatched. Their eyes darted between Ethan and Ayana, recognizing the fierce bond and mutual understanding that made them formidable. With a final curse, they mounted their horses and retreated, disappearing into the canyon's winding paths. Ayana lowered her knife, breathing steadily but alert. Ethan approached, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You were incredible," he said, admiration clear in his voice. "I don't know if I've ever seen anyone move like that." She gave a small, tight-lipped smile, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's not just skill," she said quietly. "It's instinct. And knowing the land, you've got to respect it or it will kill you." Ethan nodded, realizing the truth of her words. Her Apache heritage wasn't just a background. It was a source of wisdom and strength that gave her an edge in survival, strategy, and even in battle. He felt the bond between them deepen, tested in fire and danger, proving that their partnership was more than circumstance. As the sun climbed higher, casting harsh shadows across the canyon, they began to move again, this time more cautiously. The first threat had passed, but Ethan knew it would not be the last. The world outside the canyon held dangers both visible and hidden, and Ayana's past was a shadow that could follow them anywhere. Yet for the first time since their meeting, they felt a sense of unity. They had faced the hunters together, relied on each other's skills, and survived. And as they walked side by side through the rugged terrain, both understood that whatever trials lay ahead, they would confront them as a team, fierce, alert, and unbreakable. The desert sky was a wash of crimson and gold as the sun began to dip below the canyon rim. Ethan and Ayana rode in silence, their horses kicking up small clouds of dust that hung in the fading light. The events of the day, confronting the bounty hunters and narrowly escaping danger, had left both of them tense, but a deeper unease lingered in the air, one that neither words nor firelight could dispel. Ayana's eyes, usually so focused and controlled, now carried a weight of uncertainty. She guided her horse toward a secluded mesa, a place where the wind swept freely across the cliffs and the horizon seemed endless. Here she could think, away from the prying eyes of townsfolk and the persistent threat of pursuers. Ethan watched her carefully. He had come to understand that Ayana's spirit was fierce, independent, and unyielding. But now he realized she faced a choice far more difficult than any physical challenge they had encountered. Whether to stay with him and carve a life in the uncertain world beyond the canyon, or to return to her Apache roots, where safety, family, and destiny waited. She dismounted first, brushing dust from her clothes, and turned to him. "I can't ignore who I am," she said softly. "Or where I come from. My people, they are my past, my blood, my very essence. To turn my back on that would be like cutting myself in two." Ethan dismounted as well, his gaze steady. "I don't expect you to abandon who you are," he said. "I don't want you to choose me over your people. I want to be part of your life if you'll let me." Ayana hesitated, the wind tugging at her hair and the canyon echoing the silence between them. She thought of her childhood, the elders' wisdom, the songs, the rituals, and the unspoken laws that governed her people. She thought of the family she had lost and the village that had been destroyed. Every memory was a thread in a tapestry of survival and identity that she could not simply set aside. "But if I return," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly, "I risk everything, not just my life, but everything I've begun to feel." Her gaze fell on Ethan, and for the first time her vulnerability was raw and unguarded. "And if I stay with you, I will be leaving behind a part of myself that cannot be replaced." Ethan stepped closer, carefully closing the distance without imposing. "Then don't leave it behind," he said quietly. "Bring it with you. Your past, your people, your knowledge, all of it. I want to understand it. I want to stand beside you, not in place of who you are, but alongside it." Her eyes searched his as if weighing the sincerity of his words against the years of distrust she had carried. She had been a survivor for so long, learning to navigate the world with caution and skill. But here, with him, there was a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Not naive hope, but the fragile possibility of a future she could shape on her own terms. Finally, she exhaled, letting a measure of relief escape. "You don't know how dangerous this is," she said, shaking her head slightly. "To stay with you, it's not just a choice of heart. It's a choice of life, survival, and trust. Can you handle that?" Ethan smiled faintly, a mixture of determination and warmth in his eyes. "I've faced danger before," he said, "but I've never faced anything like this, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Whatever comes, we face it together." Ayana's lips curved into a small, tentative smile, the first genuine one since their meeting in the canyon. She felt the weight of her past and the pull of her heritage, but she also felt the grounding presence of someone who saw her not as a relic of her bloodline, but as a complete, formidable person in her own right. "I will stay," she said finally, her voice firm, "but not because I need protection. I will stay because I choose it, because I want to face the world with someone who respects my strength, not fears it." Ethan reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. The canyon stretched out around them, wild and unyielding, a reflection of the world they now both faced. For the first time, Ayana allowed herself to embrace the duality of her life, the fierce Apache blood that flowed through her veins, and the bond with a man who had rescued her not just from the canyon, but from isolation and fear. As the sun slipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the rocks, they stood together on the mesa, two figures against the vast desert, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their choice had been made, not of fear, not of obligation, but of trust, respect, and the quiet courage of hearts willing to meet in the middle of a harsh, beautiful world. The days following Ayana's choice to stay with Ethan were marked by a fragile peace. They moved cautiously through the desert and the surrounding hills, sharing the rhythms of survival, learning more from each other and deepening their bond. But peace, as Ayana had long known, was often a fleeting illusion. It began with a stranger in town, someone who appeared unremarkable at first glance, a trader with dusty boots and a quiet manner. Ethan welcomed him cautiously, offering water and a place by the fire, but Ayana's instincts bristled. There was a subtle tension in the man's posture, a way he observed her that was more calculating than casual. Her hand lingered near her knife, though she did not speak of her suspicion. That night, as the fire crackled, the trader's true intentions became clear. Ayana overheard him speaking in the shadows to another man, words laced with knowledge only someone familiar with her past could know. "She's here," he said, "and the boy with her won't stop her from coming back to us." Ayana's blood ran cold. She had trusted her instincts for years, and now they screamed that the threat she had thought behind her, the enemies of her family and tribe, was closer than ever. She revealed the betrayal to Ethan, her voice tense but controlled. "Someone knows who I am," she said. "They've been watching us. We can't let them find out more." Ethan's expression hardened and he studied the firelight flickering across her face. "We'll face them together," he said. "But first we need to understand what we're dealing with." The following day they tracked the traitor discreetly through narrow canyons and rocky outcrops. Ayana moved silently, her senses attuned to every rustle of the wind, every subtle shift in the terrain. She recognized signs of human presence immediately: the discarded scraps of food, the faint indentations in the sand, the way the wind carried sound differently across the canyon walls. Each clue confirmed what she feared. This man was no ordinary threat. He was part of something larger, something tied to her heritage and the secrets of her people. Ethan followed closely, realizing that her knowledge was their lifeline. "You've survived worse," he said quietly, keeping pace. "We'll get through this too." Finally, they confronted the traitor at a narrow pass, where the canyon walls loomed like silent sentinels. The man froze when Ayana stepped forward, her presence commanding and unyielding.
"Why are you following me?"
she demanded, voice cold and precise. The traitor faltered, realizing his target was not a frightened woman but a formidable opponent. I was told to make sure you returned," he stammered. "But You were sent to betray us," Ethan interrupted, stepping beside her with his hand on his revolver. "And now you'll answer for it." Ayana's eyes narrowed. She recognized the truth. This betrayal was not random. It was orchestrated by someone with knowledge of her past, someone who sought to manipulate or control her because of her Apache heritage. Every lesson she had learned, every skill she had honed now became vital. She moved with precision, disarming the traitor and forcing him to the ground, her presence radiating authority and danger. Ethan watched, admiration and concern mingling in his eyes. "You're incredible," he said quietly, acknowledging her prowess. But Ayana's focus remained sharp. "We're not done," she said. "This is only the beginning. They'll come again, stronger, better prepared." The revelation cut deep. Ayana's past could never truly be left behind. Her enemies were not just threats in the distant shadows. They were active, persistent, and dangerous. Yet in this moment she felt a profound clarity. She was not powerless. Her knowledge, her skills, and the bond with Ethan made her a force that even those who sought to harm her would have to reckon with. As they released the traitor under strict warning, the sun began to dip behind the canyon walls, casting the landscape in deep amber and shadow. Ayana turned to Ethan, her expression softened by trust but hardened by resolve. "We'll face them together," she said. "But I will not let my past control me. Not anymore." Ethan nodded, understanding fully that their journey was far from over. The betrayal had revealed danger, but it had also revealed their strength. A partnership forged in trust, sharpened by survival, and tempered by respect. Whatever lay ahead, they would confront it as equals, side by side, unflinching and unbroken. The canyon, once a place of peril and isolation, now seemed to hold promise as well as threat. Ayana's shadowed past had been exposed, but with it came the realization that her destiny was not simply survival. It was a path she could shape, guided by her own courage and the alliance she had found in Ethan. The morning air was crisp and carried the scent of pine and sage as Ayana led Ethan through the rugged paths of her ancestral lands. The cliffs and canyons she had once called home stretched around them, familiar and unforgiving. Each step she took resonated with memory, the lessons of her childhood, the wisdom of her elders, and the echoes of a family long lost. Ethan followed quietly, his eyes taking in the landscape, aware that this was more than a physical journey. It was a return to roots, a confrontation with the past that had shaped Ayana into the formidable woman he admired. He understood that her Apache heritage was not just a lineage. It was a responsibility, a source of strength, and the key to her destiny. As they approached the outskirts of the Apache village, Ayana's pace slowed. Her eyes scanned the horizon, taking in the tents, the warriors, and the familiar symbols of her people. There was tension in the air, Some elders recognized her immediately, their eyes widening in surprise, while others watched silently, wary of the stranger beside her. She took a deep breath, centering herself. "This is where I belong," she whispered, almost to herself. "And this is where I must face who I am." Ethan remained by her side, offering silent support. He could see the storm of emotions behind her calm exterior: pride, fear, longing, and determination. "I'll be here," he said softly. "Whatever happens." Ayanna approached the council of elders, her steps deliberate and steady. The village fell silent, all eyes on the woman who had returned. She knelt briefly in respect, then rose, meeting the gaze of the council with unwavering resolve. "I have come back," she announced, her voice carrying across the open space. "I am Ayanna of the Apache people. I return not to ask, but to honor my heritage and stand among you once more." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some of surprise, others of approval. But the elders remained solemn. One of the eldest, a woman with eyes like dark embers, stepped forward. "Ayanna," she said, her voice strong but tempered with curiosity. "You left when you were young, when danger took your family and scattered your people. Why have you returned?" Ayanna met her gaze, her own eyes steady. "Because I carry the blood of our people, the teachings of our ancestors, and the strength to protect what remains. I have faced the outside world, survived, and returned stronger. I seek not to lead but to serve and to reclaim the place my people have shaped in me." The elders exchanged glances, weighing her words. Then slowly, approval began to take root. They recognized her courage, her resilience, and the rare combination of wisdom and skill she had gained in the world beyond their lands. Ayanna had proven herself not just by surviving, but by mastering the lessons of life, danger, and trust. Ethan watched from a respectful distance, understanding that this was Ayanna's moment. He did not step forward uninvited, for this was not his place, but he felt an overwhelming admiration for the woman who had faced exile, danger, and betrayal and had returned not as a victim, but as a force to be reckoned with. After a tense silence, the elder woman nodded. "You have returned with knowledge, courage, and honor. You have claimed your destiny, Ayanna, as both protector and leader of your people. We welcome you home." Ayanna bowed her head slightly, gratitude and pride mingling in her expression. She had faced the shadow of her past, confronted her fears, and stood firmly in the place her blood and heritage had always intended. Later, as the sun began to set, she turned to Ethan. "I belong here," she said softly, "but I also belong with you. I have never felt stronger or freer than in the moments we've shared." Ethan took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "And I will always stand with you," he said. "Through every challenge, every danger, every choice. Together we are stronger than anything the world can throw at us." Ayanna smiled, the kind of smile that spoke of acceptance, love, and the harmony of two paths converging. For the first time, she felt fully in control of her life, her destiny no longer dictated by fear or circumstance. Her Apache heritage, her strength, and her bond with Ethan had merged into a singular force, capable of facing both the world she had returned to and the life she was building beyond it. As the golden light of evening bathed the village and canyon alike, Ayanna and Ethan stood side by side, ready to embrace the future. Her past had been claimed, her destiny accepted, and their shared journey had just begun, a testament to courage, trust, and the power of choosing one's own path. The first light of dawn crept over the canyon, illuminating the village with a soft, golden glow. The world felt still, as though it were holding its breath in reverence for the life being rebuilt within its rugged landscape. Ayanna stood atop a rocky outcrop, looking down at her people moving through the village. She felt the pulse of her heritage, the strength of her ancestors, and the knowledge that she had reclaimed her place, not as a survivor, but as a force of guidance and protection. Beside her, Ethan adjusted the saddle on his horse, glancing at her with a warmth that reached beyond words. "You ready?" he asked, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. Ayanna nodded, turning toward him. "I'm ready," she said. Her voice carried the certainty of someone who had faced betrayal, danger, and the shadow of loss and emerged unbroken. "Ready to live my life, with you by my side." Together they rode through the canyon trails, the wind sweeping across their faces, the earth beneath them alive with memory and possibility. The villagers paused to watch, a mixture of awe and acceptance in their eyes. Ayana's return had been more than symbolic. It had breathed new life into their community, a reminder that courage, resilience, and connection were never lost, only waiting to be reclaimed. As they reached a quiet plateau overlooking the valley, Ethan dismounted and offered his hand to Ayana. She took it, the gesture a silent promise of partnership, trust, and shared destiny. Here, away from the whispers of the past and the prying eyes of strangers, they could envision a future unbound by fear. Ayana looked around the valley, noting the water glinting in the sun, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, and the wildflowers pushing defiantly through the arid soil. "This land," she said softly, "it's part of me. But so are you, and together we can shape what comes next." Ethan squeezed her hand. "Then let's shape it together," he replied. "No running, no hiding, just building a life we choose." Over the following months, the two worked side by side. Ethan helped the villagers strengthen their homes and cultivate the land, blending his knowledge of frontier skills with Ayana's intimate understanding of survival and the desert's hidden resources. She taught him the ancient ways of her people, the tracking of animals, reading the wind, identifying medicinal plants, and in turn, he shared strategies for defense, trade, and negotiation in a changing world. Their bond deepened, not only as partners but as equals. Each day they faced challenges together: harsh weather, skeptical outsiders, and occasional threats from those who still sought to exploit the vulnerabilities of her people. But every challenge reinforced their trust, honed their skills, and strengthened the invisible thread connecting them. One evening, as the sun painted the canyon in shades of crimson and gold, Ayana and Ethan sat atop a hill overlooking the village. Children played in the distance, elders spoke quietly of plans and traditions, and the horses grazed peacefully. Ayana rested her head against Ethan's shoulder, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat and the warmth of his presence. "We've come far," she said softly, almost to herself. Ethan nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And we've only just begun. The future is ours, Ayana, not dictated by the past but shaped by our choices." She smiled, a mixture of contentment and determination. "Then let it be a future forged together," she said, her voice carrying both the authority of her Apache blood and the tenderness of her heart. In the valley below, life continued, vibrant, resilient, and full of promise. The canyon, once a place of danger and uncertainty, had become a sanctuary. Ayana had embraced her heritage, reclaimed her strength, and accepted the love and partnership that Ethan offered. And Ethan, who had once been a stranger passing through the wilderness, had become her steadfast companion, her equal, and the anchor in a world that often demanded endurance beyond measure. As night fell, stars glittered across the vast desert sky. Ethan and Ayana stood together, hand in hand, their silhouettes framed by the canyon's jagged edges. They had faced the wilderness, betrayal, and the shadows of the past and emerged unbroken. Now, with trust, courage, and love as their guide, they were ready to forge a life that honored her heritage, embraced the present, and looked boldly toward the future. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of sage, earth, and freedom. And in that quiet, sacred moment, two lives intertwined, a destiny reclaimed and a future forged. Strong, unyielding, and luminous, began anew.